This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are thrilled to be joined by Frances Brown, writing as Claire Jem. So, Frances is an award-winning author of supernatural suspense, contemporary romance, and women's fiction. She also writes author resource guidebooks and presents seminars on writing craft and marketing. Her supernatural suspense, Hearts Unlocked, won the 2016 New York Book Festival and was a finalist in the 2017 Roan Awards. Claire loves exploring the paranormal and holds a certificate in parapsychology from Duke University's Rhine Research Center. She earned her MFA in creative writing from Lesley University. And a New York native, Frances now lives in Massachusetts with her husband of 40 years. When she's not writing, she works for Tufts University in the field of scientific research. She is available for seminars, media interviews, and loves to travel. So, Frances, thank you for joining us today. We're so glad you could come to the round table.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. And we wanted you to come on to talk about paranormal romance as a genre. Specifically, you have published numerous books in that genre under the pen name Claire Jem. To get us rolling, could you tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer and what led you to working in that genre specifically?
Well, my journey as a writer has been sort of like a roller coaster ride and has spanned now quite a number of years. I believe in ghosts, okay? Mm-hmm. And I love to read romance. And when I went searching to find romances that had a ghost story, sort of like Gothic romance, only set in modern day, mm-hmm. I was having difficulty getting my fill. So I thought, I guess there's a hole in the market here, and I guess this is where I need to start writing. And every one of my supernatural suspense books is either set in a place where I have had personally been there. Mm-hmm. Stories are fiction. I'm not a ghost hunter, and I can't say I went and staked them out or anything. Mm-hmm. But each place that I have written about, I really get very involved in the place and in the history of the place. The other side of my life is research. So research is something I love to do. And so that's how this whole thing started. Right.
Wow, I can definitely relate to that. Only for me, it was ghost story murder mysteries instead of ghost story romance. And it, what you were saying about the location and doing the research, the traveling there, it reminds me of Stephen King and the Stanley Hotel, as the setting for The Shining. Yeah. Yeah. So what defines paranormal romance? I mean, we've got ghosts and we've got romance, but can we dig into that and go a little deeper on what makes this a genre?
Paranormal is a huge, sprawling genre that most people, when they say paranormal romance, they aren't cognizant. They may be cognizant of the little piece that they're interested in, but you have vampires, you have witches, you have werewolves, you have shapeshifters. Paranormal does tend to overlap with fantasy in many cases. Mm-hmm. And I had a difficult time putting my book into a cubbyhole because it's difficult, other than calling it modern Gothic, which doesn't really have a category in these times. Mm-hmm. It was difficult to narrow it down, because paranormal romance can, as I said, we're talking everything from vampires to werewolves, shapeshifters, and then a lot of magic, psychic. One of my books, Arts and Lust, as a matter of fact, deals with a haunted hotel, but the main character is psychic. And so that's how most of the haunting comes to be, is through her eyes and through her experiences. So it's a very broad genre. I also review books for In Detail magazine. And, of course, they send me a lot of paranormal. And I never know what I'm going to get. From one time to the next. Oh, really? Because it's such a broad genre. You can have a witch story with a lot of magic. You can have, it can be set in a future time. It can be a time travel. It can also be a time travel. So there's a lot of overlap. But I guess what makes a paranormal, that title, is that there's something that you wouldn't find happening in your neighborhood necessarily, unless you live in really strange.
Right. Do you find for yourself, and also more generally, since you review the genre as well, that most writers stick to one thing, like they only write vampires or they only write haunted houses, or if you're in that genre, do writers like to explore all the different nooks and crannies of the paranormal world?
It depends. Some authors stick very strictly to shape-shifting or werewolves or whatever. But I've read quite a few books by authors that, there goes my cat. I've read quite a few books by authors who have gone from a ghost story to witches, and then from the witches they add a lot of magic. So it depends on the author. I would say probably the majority, though, have a favorite slot that they like to write in. And I got stuck in the ghost romance, and I have been asked so many times when I go to speak and when I go to do book signings, they always want to know, well, how do you fall in love with a ghost? They think it's like the movie Ghost,
right?
You know, where have a love story going on between a human and someone who has passed. And that's not what my stories are. All of my stories, I have a very human romance. It's contemporary romance with a ghost story running through it. And that's my niche.
Okay. So then would you consider yourself a romance writer with a paranormal subplot or theme? You know, do you have to sort of nest those, like it's either a romance with paranormal or it's a paranormal story with romance?
That's exactly right. And I would say that my work is contemporary romance with paranormal elements. But when you type that into a search, you know, it's huge. But the paranormal element, although it does play a strong part in the plot, my main story is a love story.
Nice. So how do you weave, speaking of plot, how do you weave your paranormal elements into a contemporary romance story? If we were going to analyze or deconstruct the plotting process for this genre, what would you say about that?
My paranormal plot line or subplot, or what the string that weaves through, is usually based on a location. And so I pick a location that is haunted, and then I set my real people in that location. And so they're interacting, but you've got this, they're dealing with the ghosts who they are encountering in this location where they are either working or in Hearts Unlocked is the hero owns the hotel, and the heroine is an architect who is trying to refurbish it, but she's also psychic. So it starts. That's how it starts. It has started for me with the location and the history of the location, and then I weave the romance in. Which is, I have to bring something up here, because this is how I met you or learned about you, was from your book on character development. And I had kind of hit a wall. I'd run out of really, really exciting places or settings for my stories. And there was one line in your book that said that people will remember your stories because of your characters, not because of your plot. And I was like, okay, well, I need to back up and develop my characters before I decide what haunted location they are going to be interacting with. So it has changed my viewpoint and helped me tremendously. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic to hear, and I think it segues beautifully into a question about characters. So when you're writing a paranormal romance, you've got the couple, obviously, the romantic leads, but then you've got ghosts, so they are supporting characters in effect, and then as well as any other characters who live in this world, who come and go from the setting. So, yeah, without asking a specific question, I'd like to just open up characters in paranormal romance as a topic. Or maybe Robert or Kathryn has a specific question.
I have a question.
Good.
I have a question. So I actually, I read one of your books. I read Electricity, just out of curiosity. So I just went and picked one up. And I noticed that you very tightly wove the ghost character directly to your romantic female protagonist. So how important is it to you that the ghost character be personally connected to a protagonist? Or can the haunting be completely unrelated?
I don't think so. At least not in my books, because with ghosts, you have this element of disbelief. You have more people don't believe in ghosts than do. So you've got to have a personal connection of the ghost with one of your characters at least, because otherwise the credibility to the other character isn't going to be there. And, if your heroine believes this is a ghost, and your hero doesn't believe in ghosts, he starts out thinking she's pretty much a wacko. And that happens in a number of my books. And so that's part of the conflict that I have going on between the hero and the heroine is, this is for real. This is really happening. And then I also like to have some sort of a, believe it or not, a historical basis for my ghost maybe could be really there. And so that's where the research comes in. But that's what I feel. I feel that there has to be a strong connection between at least one of my characters and one of the protagonists.
So do you always, you mentioned having the conflict of one character believing, one thinking this is impossible. Do you always make the ghost element frightening or threatening to the relationship, or is it ever a humorous element or a supportive element, maybe a ghost who's trying to help the lovers connect in some way or something? How do you approach that supporting character's role in the romance?
Okay, now this is where you're going to believe that I'm a wacko.
Well, unlikely, because
I sort of let my ghosts tell me how they're going to react to, or what role they're going to play. Of course, being put on the spot now, I'm like, running a blank on all my books, but I believe in Hearts Unlocked, the ghost actually is trying to bring the hero and heroine together, and for a very personal reason. In Spirits of the Heart, the ghost is asking for help from both the hero and the heroine. And then in Electricity, the ghosts are also asking to be heard and to be recognized, but I don't think they necessarily are pushing the romance. The romance is developing. Did you get that feeling, Kathryn? Did I come across with that correctly?
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. They're more of a separate element than part of the romance itself. Although they do interact to help the protagonist in the end, it's not for the romance sake.
Right.
So what other story elements are critical to a successful paranormal romance? So we've touched on plot and character, and we can certainly go deeper into those, but you mentioned location, doing research into real places and historical fact, and having that be an integral part of your story. Let's dig into that, into setting and research a bit.
It's amazing to me how, when I get an inspiration for a story, how the location just grabs me by the throat and more or less puts a rubric out for me to follow. With Hearts Unlocked, the hotel that I write about, it doesn't even really exist. I created it. However, there is a very strong local legend about that little lake, that it used to be the place where the mafia came up from New York City and dumped the body. I heard it from my husband, who grew up there. And so that, that was really fun to try to do the research on things that aren't necessarily written down anywhere. A lot of it had to be done. I had to go to location and talk to the local people about what they believed happened there. Spirits of the Heart, that is an asylum that is actually in the town where I grew up. And that was another location that just always called to me, and I had to go digging and go back and figure out what the history of the place was. Interesting little tidbit about that research was, I went to that location. We live about 3 hours away from there now. I went to that location with my sister-in-law to take some pictures of the building, the abandoned building with the 8-foot chain link fence all the way around, to take some pictures for the trailer. And 2 weeks later, now the building's been sitting there since 1897. 2 weeks later, it burnt to the ground, and nobody really knows who started the fire. And I get chills just thinking about it. It was almost like, okay, you got your pictures now. Write the book. So that really put a fire under my butt as far as getting the story written.
Yes, and did you put a fire into the story? Did that play into your plot eventually?
It was the pinnacle. It was the yeah. And I also got some fantastic photographs of the actual fire. From the town's fire chief. And I did a signing in that town a couple of years later, and the fireman that had taken the pictures came with his wife. It was really cool. The research for me is extremely important, because I have to be personally invested in the story in order for me to bring it to life for my readers.
Definitely.
And I can tell you from the book that I read that I could tell that you loved the history of that place. Do you think your readers is that something that they go to your books for? Is that feeling of depth of setting and the historical knowledge, and not, it's like crossing the historical with the contemporary?
I believe so, because I get asked a lot of questions about, well, does this place really exist? And, how did you find out about it? And what made you decide to place the story there? So, yeah, I do think that it probably appeals to a crossover of people who like historically based stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think the juxtaposition of a real history on a paranormal ghost story is somewhat unusual, and I think that does appeal to my readers.
Mm-hmm.
That was going to be one of my questions. How much of that do you engage with your readers? I mean, it sounds like you do a fair bit. Do you use author notes, for example, in the books? Do you use it in any marketing or across your general profile? So to draw people in, say, this is based on a real setting, or this is my inspiration here or there.
It depends on whether or not I have the freedom to do so.
Right.
Okay. When I wrote Electricity, I was working on the campus of the place where that building is. I had to change all the names, of course, because otherwise I would get sued by the place who owns it now. But so I have to be careful. I have to be very careful, because not everybody is thrilled to have a ghost story set in their location.
In their backyard.
Yeah, exactly. Now, on the other flip side of that coin, Hearts Unlocked is set in this little bitty tiny, and I mean, we're talking one cross street in upstate New York. And I did a signing there, and honest to God, I expected to be sitting in this creepy old museum, which was creepy and desolate, and I expected to be sitting there for 2 hours all by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to actually open up the auditorium for me to do the reading, because the locals were so thrilled that I had set this book in their location. So it all depends. I mean, it can really work for me, or it can work against me. I haven't been sued yet.
That is a good thing. Yes.
My mother-in-law is an avid reader, and she reads across all sorts of genres. And I know when there's a book that really tickles her, that she enjoys some of the history, and it could be a foreign country, or it could be a particular building, or it could be a certain character with a history. She'll actually then go and Google it and look up the author, and she enjoys all of that background. And it strikes me that you've probably got that sort of readership that would lend themselves to falling in love with all of the things that surround your story. That sounds like you use quite heavily to lean into it.
I would think so, and that's why also I spend probably way too much time researching and making sure that I get the details right, because I have actually personally been reading a very well-known paranormal author, a very well-known, very successful paranormal book, and I got 2/3 of the way through the book, and she stated something that was, because remember, the other side of my life is scientific research.
Mm-hmm.
So she stated something that was so blatantly impossible and wrong. Not just impossible, but it was wrong. I think the book did. So I try to make my experiences for my readers. You can Google this all you want to. You're not going to trip me up on that. This really happened. And, the ghosts, maybe, well, maybe they're there, maybe they're not. But everything that I've said that's a historical fact is going to check out.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you use beta readers, for example, or do you use fact-checking editors as well as story editors, for example?
I use beta readers.
Yeah.
I have not actually found anybody who fact-checks quite as obsessively as I do. So,
Yes.
No, I don't use the fact-checking. Yeah. But my beta readers I do try to send the book to somebody in the location who lives in the area of where I wrote the book.
Yeah.
And so they can tell me, oh, no, that building actually is gone, or, you know. So, I guess that would be a form of fact-checking.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah, so what is your writing process like? How much time do you spend in the research, and, when do you feel it's okay to take creative license with, say, setting? So not something where historical accuracy is required, but you need to put this kind of building in this town or something. And can you just tell us a little bit about your process?
It's really, it depends on the book. It depends on the location. As I said, I flunked a hotel down on the shores of a lake that never was there. And people in the town actually, when they came to the signing, actually asked me, they said, I remember that hotel. And I'm like, oh, you might, but it was never there.
It is now.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. My writing process starts, of course, with the spark. The idea, oh my God, what if? That's how Hearts and Rocks started. We were driving around the lake, and my husband was telling me about this urban legend, and I said, what if there was a hotel and it was haunted, and da-da-da-da-da. And for the 3-hour drive home, my poor husband had to listen to me verbally outline my book. And then other times it doesn't come so easily. And those are the harder times. The times when I have the setting, I have the history of the setting, I've done all this research, but I can't figure out who my people are and why they're there and what's going to bring them together and what's holding them apart, which is where your book helped me.
Oh,
because
thank you.
now I know. No, it's really true. That is the difficult part. What has been the difficult part for me, at least for the past season or so, is figuring out. I mean, I'm really good at the research for the place, and I have a pretty good imagination because I still believe that there are monsters under the bed. I have written scenes that at 2:00 in the morning, when my fingers just wouldn't stop going, and I stopped at 2 in the morning and said, I have to get up for work in 2 hours. I have to stop. I've gone back at 2 in the morning and read over the scene and been like scared. And
wow.
I wrote. That's my process. It's pretty much all over the place. And I will go from staring at a blinking cursor, cursing at the blinking cursor, to typing so fast that I don't even realize what I've written until it's on the page.
Wow.
So it's kind of weird.
I love that. That's great, though. Don't we all live for those experiences where the words are coming so fast you're trying to keep up with them?
Yes. And for the times when I wake up in the middle of the night with this little voice talking in my ear, and I'm like, okay, I'll get up and I'll start writing down what you're saying. And a number of my characters have come to me that way. Really cute. Yeah, I told you'd think I was wacko.
Not at all, actually. No.
It's one of the few professions where you can make money by telling people about the voices in your head, isn't it? It's very interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And maybe that's why I'm drawn to asylums, abandoned asylums, because it's sort of camaraderie with these people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And instead of thinking you're crazy, we get a little envious. Like, okay, come on, where are my guys? Come on, tell me that story.
Exactly.
So what about the romantic elements then of the paranormal side of it? Where do you see the core of romance being important to the readership that you write for?
That is the present moment, I feel, is probably undergoing some metamorphosis.
Yeah.
my first few books, the romances were very graphic as far as sex scenes. And it's because that's what the romance readership that I was reading in other paranormal books, that's what's in there.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the people who are doing well, are the ones with very explicit and very often sex scenes. And it worked for me the first few times that I wrote it. I'm getting to the point now where I want to put more emphasis on the emotional part of the relationship and less graphic.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest. There's only so many ways you can describe a certain act without it being either bizarre or repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why developing the characters is one of my goals for my future books, is to make that emotional connection and the emotional discord and then getting together, making that more important and having less of those scenes that are, I know some readers, a lot of readers love them, but apparently they may be a little disappointed with some of my future books, but I'm hoping to draw a readership that will understand where I'm going with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure that readership is out there. I agree with you. I've seen it in plenty of manuscripts as an editor where the scenes do become repetitive because, you know, you can only mention a bulge in a man's pants so many times. And as a reader, you start thinking, okay, what else is he attracted to? How else does he feel about her? What else is happening with the physical senses, with, you know, give me a racing heart and sweaty palms, if nothing else. Just,
right.
You know, mix it up a bit.
Even as a man reading, you know, that sort of thing, it's much more interesting if it's not just mechanical. You know, it's the lust part that has to underpin everything. And what I love about romances is the tension that drives the wedge between that lust, you know, and that tension could be for any reason. It might be the paranormal thing, or it might be something completely different. So, you know, that's what interests me about. I mean, I don't write romance, I don't read a lot of it, but I'm involved in the marketing of some of it. So it's really interesting when you come across a synopsis for a novel and you see, yeah, that's probably not going to quite work. You're going to disappoint your readers if you do it that way, or the other way where they're just leaning heavily into it's just sex the whole time. Yeah, but it's going to get boring. And I would suspect that your readers, especially if they're interested in the intricacies of the setting, the sex part of it is just not going to bother them as much. They probably just want more of the, you know, the tension and all the you know, mystique and the atmosphere.
Right. The love story.
Right.
That's what, I want to make mine more of a love story, not a sex story.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I probably read more romances than is healthy for me, but I am firmly in the less is more camp when it comes to sex. Like, reading Electricity, I will tell you, I was perfectly happy with your couple of paragraphs, and that was it, and I was very happy. So you did a good job of convincing me of the emotional relationship, and I think that is the most important thing, especially if you're going for characters. Right? Because then the character development together as a couple is what is satisfying at the end, not necessarily like we said, the mechanical act of just like, here we go.
Right.
And I started to read more of the authors because, as I'm sure you're all aware, they run the gamut. And in paranormal, it's a broad. You have there's some paranormal authors that I can't even read because they're like erotica. They're erotica with werewolves, you know.
Yep.
I think. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have sweet romance or Christian romance, which is, you know, you barely get a kiss. But I think for me, those stories lack the lust element. They lack that magnetic thing that
Mm-hmm.
either pulls them together, and then where do you put the wedge if there isn't that magnetic thing? I know that I'm
Yeah.
not being
Right.
very technical here, but
No, I think that's a perfect analogy for it. You know, if the attraction isn't strong enough, then the thing that drives them apart doesn't need to be very strong. And then where's the dramatic tension? Where's the drive of your plot? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I started to read more authors that are not just in paranormal, but in other genres. Because actually, I'm starting to lean toward historical romance. I think my next book may be a historical romance. Because, I mean, let's face it, I love the history. I
Right.
really do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've started to read more authors that lean more toward a middle line. They tell you just enough so that you know what's happening, but we don't have to like pull back the covers, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That is not. It's just. I don't enjoy writing that anymore. I just don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a really good takeaway for everybody who's listening is that wherever you fall on the spectrum, it's not about right or wrong. It's about what do you want to write as an artist, and what do you like to engage with as a reader? Because if you're writing to market, you might be forcing your story a little bit to go in a direction that isn't the most natural and fulfilling for you, and then it might not end up being the most natural and fulfilling experience for your readers as well. So, you know, it's not that you should write this way or that way, but you should
Exactly
discover,
right. Because there is a market for the
for all of
There's
it.
a market for yes, there is. But if I feel like if I'm not really excited, and I don't mean sexually, but if I'm not really excited about this story and my characters and what's going on, it's not going to come through on the page.
Right.
So that's the takeaway here: is write what you're comfortable writing, write what you feel has to be in there to please your audience.
Yeah.
Right.
I think in romance as well, it's important to be really consistent. I mean, you see in reviews where readers have gotten halfway through and it's been clean all the way up until then, and then all of a sudden they hit this major explicit scene because the writers thought they've had to do that because it's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
So you know, I think it's really, if you're going to write clean, write clean. If you're going to write dirty, sort of thing. Otherwise, and as under your name as well, it depends on what name you're writing under. If you're all over the place, then that can lose readers as well, because they pick up your beautiful, clean historical fiction romance, and then they pick up, oh, this is really nice. I read some of their other books, and all of a sudden they're into these raging BDSM scenes. Oh, no.
And, you know, that being said, I have to warn Kathryn, you've read Electricity. Don't read Hearts Unlocked.
Thank you for the warning.
It won an award. It did very well. But if you were okay with Electricity, and then Hearts Unlocked is going to be a little bit much for you. And then I have a question for you guys that you might be able to answer for me. In leaning toward a less graphic romance, and I've been wondering if I'm going to start writing historicals that don't have any ghosts in them, do I need a new pen name, or can I just send out the word and put it on my Facebook page and let my readers know that, okay, I'm going to try something a little different here? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't do another pen name. I think you're only half a step away from what your readership currently enjoy. If you're writing something wildly different, children's picture books or something like that, I'd say, yeah, maybe. But even then,
that would be wildly different.
Yeah.
Right.
But you're writing the same book just without the paranormal element. So I think as long as you're clear in your marketing that it isn't, maybe it comes with a series name or some kind of branding that makes it slightly different, but I wouldn't change the name. No, in fact, I'd lean into it because you're already very good at your detailed research, and people would like you for that.
Oh, it's good to hear.
Yes.
It's hard enough to build up the following for one.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah, exactly. That's without all the logistical nightmare of maintaining more than one name.
For that reason alone. Yes. Yeah, but I think the idea of just doing, very differently styled covers or something so that people are, get a clear, this is the romance, this is the, or the paranormal, this is the historical. So as Robert said, just have some quick visual distinction and done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yes. So any final thoughts? How about advice for writers who really want to write paranormal romance? What would you say to somebody interested in starting in that genre?
Pick a flavor.
Mm.
Pick a flavor. Decide whether you want to write about vampires or werewolves or ghosts or shapeshifters or witches. There's just like a ice cream display. There's a plethora of flavors. Pick a flavor and then read everything you can get your hands on. And don't just read the books. Consume them on different media. Believe it or not, reading a paperback, and I have read a paperback, and then I've read it as an ebook, and then I've listened to it as an audiobook, and I get something different from it each time. So that's my advice to anyone who wants to write anything, is to pick your flavor, pick what you want to write, and then read as much as you can in that genre. And then you can decide, do I want to have a lot of graphic scenes or do I want it to be, closed door? And then find your favorites and read them on Kindle and read them in paperback and listen to them in audio. And I swear that has been, I will say this with every bit of gumption from my heart. If I had learned that trick, I wouldn't have needed an MFA. I have learned more from reading and listening in different formats than I did in my MFA. Sorry, Leslie, but really.
Wow, well, that is excellent advice and a great place to wrap up the show. And you are coming right back on with us to talk about crafting dual POVs, which is important for any genre where you want to have two point of view characters, but especially for romance. So thank you, Frances. And
thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.